Yields back, and I recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Friedman, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony being here. You know, I have to say that it's hard as a Los Angeles Congress member sometimes to hear Los Angeles at the time when it's reeling from disasters and when victims are still living in hotels, somehow seeming to be blamed for their own disaster. I really appreciate Mr. Guthrie's response to Mr. Kiley's question about what California could do better, because it is important that we do evaluate our response to disaster, do audits to make sure that we improve. And so your very good suggestions about disaster management are something that I'm very interested in, and I appreciate your saying them. I do feel that I have to respond a bit about the idea that somehow these fires were caused because of not having pressure in hydrants or reservoirs being empty. Yes, a reservoir was down for repair, and we should always look at what our timetables are. And fire hydrants were not designed to put out 1,000 fires in a residential neighborhood simultaneously. There's not a fire system in this country that would be able to function adequately under those kinds of conditions. But due to what's happening with climate change and changing conditions, we are going to have to look at our infrastructure and make investments to counter conditions that this country has never seen. I grew up in Florida, and my entire childhood, I believe there were 2 hurricanes, my whole childhood, and now we see multiple hurricanes every single year. So we have extreme weather events happening around this country, and we've got to make investments in our infrastructure and our emergency response to counter that. And we can't pretend that it's not because of climate change as well. And so efforts that we can make in this body to slow that change down are also going to help save lives. So I've been working on fire issues for many, many years in the California legislature. California has invested hundreds of millions of dollars over the past several years, year after year, to beef up our response, to add more resources for fighting fires, for fire resiliency. And we saw those resources deployed in these fires with hundreds and hundreds of firefighters on the line, more air response than we've ever seen in this nation's history. We're really hurricane winds, driving embers in a time of year that normally is wet and with record dryness instead. And we're going to unfortunately have to keep putting those resources on the ground. Now, I've introduced my first 2 bills around supporting wildfire victims with the Don't Penalize Victims Act, which would ensure that charitable donations are not used to unfairly penalize victims of natural disasters. I appreciate the members of this committee to making that a bipartisan bill. We also have introduced the Stop Disaster Price Gouging Act to stop price gouging around this country after natural disasters. I also believe in holding FEMA accountable. We have had a lot of concerns in Los Angeles around air quality, soil and water pollution because of these disasters, and I would love to see FEMA doing more monitoring on a regular basis so that the people in Los Angeles know whether or not they need to take precautions if they send their kids to school in Pasadena, or if their water has been contaminated, or whether or not they can plant things in their garden if they're worried that their soils become contaminated. We haven't seen FEMA take that seriously, and I would like to see that happen. I do have a quick question about disaster aid, and we've heard a little talk about that. But unfortunately, this administration has said that they want to hold Californians accountable, and that they, I think, want to punish the people of California, and not for anything about their response, but just because this administration doesn't like their policies around things like voting rights or around our commitment to diversity. So I have a simple yes or no question. For Ms. Lauder, when Hurricane Helene hit North Carolina last year, did President Biden condition disaster aid against major policy changes in that state? It was a yes or no question.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Guthrie, when Hurricane Milton hit Florida last year, did President Biden condition disaster aid on the people of Florida?
No.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I would hope that this administration does not play games with people's lives. Last, I want to ask about staffing. FEMA's been on the ground in Los Angeles helping people, and they're very grateful that there are FEMA officials there. I'm very worried about the mass layoffs that we are seeing to public employees, and I've had people in Los Angeles say, when I show up to that office, are there going to be enough people there to help me? I want to know whether you think workplace cuts are going to make it easier or harder for people after disaster to get a live person on the phone or someone to sit in front of them and help them out with whatever issue they have. I'll start with Mr. Garcia, I think.
Absolutely. Workforce depletions do bring challenges. Local communities and NACO County members need, in many regards, that human capital that brings that technical assistance, that helps to get the funding necessary to help those communities recover and rebuild. So we do need the people behind all the other federal guidelines and framework.
Thank you. Mr. Curry, would you like to respond?
It's not going to help. That's my easy answer. FEMA will always marshal the resources towards response and the disasters that have just happened. What the cuts do is it affects the disasters that happened 6 months ago, a year ago, 6 years ago. So it's a cumulative effect because of how many disasters they're dealing with.